Spirituality and Consciousness. I'm Cosmo Sharf.
And I'm Summer Perry.
And on today's episode, we are joined by the host of the amazing Synchronicity podcast, Noah Lampert. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Of course, yeah. Great to have you here as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to jump on today. Your podcast is amazing. Sorry, just had to make some adjustments here. Yeah, you talk a lot about, spirituality, synchronicity, the more esoteric side of life. And I'd love if we could start with a little bit of an origin story about, how you got to where you are today. I know you are a musician, and yeah, I would love to get a sense of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the origin story, I guess so far it stayed consistent, which is good. I've always had like an avid interest in the esoteric and just kind of spiritual stuff before I even knew it was called that. Just like from a kid, I liked reading about philosophy and found myself reading a lot of Carl Jung at like a pretty young age, like 13, 14. And then I took psychedelics when I was 15, took LSD, and that was a game changer. I was actually just talking about this with Denise, my partner, earlier today, the first time. And that really just changed my entire perspective on life and who I was and just what reality was. And from there, that sent me on a pretty, psychedelic path for the next 8 years. Like I was pretty regularly doing psychedelics, LSD, mushrooms, smoking a fair amount of weed. And when I was 2021, I had a nominal dose of LSD, one hit, 100 mics most likely, and I didn't stop tripping for 3 months. Like it was consistent. Like I was just tripping straight for 3 months. Full, like everything you ever get on like a moderate LSD dose, it just didn't go away through the dreaming state. So I'd go to sleep, I'd be tripping in the dream, I'd wake up, I'd be the same. And that really changed my perspective. So I experienced everything as like one giant synchronicity. Like there weren't gaps, right? There wasn't like, oh, there's a lot. They weren't coming fast together. It just didn't stop, which because it was 3 months long gave me enough of like reality of that to work with, to like understand, like start playing around with it. Like, this is fucking crazy. Like the normal thoughts you would have if you couldn't get out of it. Like you'd be like, what is this? Like, can I stop it? Like what happens here? Can I make this thing? So it was a pretty intense experience, and I was like that for about 3 months. Then I crashed, and I had never been depressed in my life. I had never really experienced, I'd been sad. I'd experienced the regular gamut of emotions, but I never got stuck in a state where like I literally couldn't get myself motivated or inspired or out of bed, basically. And so I ended up, I was at college. It was at Berkeley College of Music in Boston. And I had to go back home to the DC area and basically like reconstitute myself. Saw a psychiatrist, eventually at the time got diagnosed as bipolar, and really just like started a journey of like kind of reconstituting myself. I had blasted myself so open that by the time I was done with that, like I kind of didn't have like an identity that I could latch onto. So got diagnosed, went back to college, graduated, moved to New York. And then there, I pretty early on, like within the first 6 months of moving there, I'm like, I don't think what happened to me is bipolar. Like I haven't had anything, like any other thing come close to that. Granted, I had been taking lithium, but I was like, let me get off of this. Let me see if I can like go through a psychiatrist, tell my family that I don't think this is actually something wrong that happened to me, or there's like some chemical imbalance. But I think like I went through a very powerful experience that didn't have any people around me and myself didn't have context for. So I did that and got off it. And, that was, Jesus, a long time ago now, like 12 years ago. And not bipolar. I have subsequently found out through the podcast and a lot of things I talk about that a lot of people have these experiences, and a lot of people have this like deep inner knowing that there's not something wrong with them. And this isn't to discount like all facets of mental illness. Like it certainly exists in some capacity, especially if people believe it. But the ability to kind of transcend that really like it got me in touch with a deep aspect of who I was. Started working with Ram Dass and his organization for about 5 years in 2011. Started a podcast network through that, MindPod Network, then started a podcast, Synchronicity. And from there, Basically I would describe like the first 4 years of the podcast. It was just like a platform for me to interview cool people who I thought were, doing cool shit. And then last year, like July, June, I stumbled upon through a series of synchronicities, Neville Goddard and a lot of his teachings. And that lined up with that experience that I had had in 2003 when I was about 20. To the T. I was like, holy shit. Like I'd never heard anyone talk about so specifically the things that I had experienced with no context before that. And so then I started experimenting with some of the things he was talking about, a lot of these imaginal acts. And from there, shit got pretty wild. But that's basically the origin story of the podcast. It links up through a lot of synchronicities, of course.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. That's quite a stunning experience. And yeah, I'm glad... I'm glad you're okay from all of that. It sounds a little bit harrowing. And
oh yeah.
I've heard many people mention things like that happening to them before, where they went into a state for a longer than expected period of time, and then of course they got misdiagnosed, and they later felt like it wasn't a problem. It was just like their consciousness was blown wide open so quickly.
Yeah, that's exactly what it felt like. I remember the first thing I thought it was like a Kundalini thing, and I think it might have been. I just know that what was my saving grace outside of like an external good support system with my family and friends was that like I never really bought into the fact that there was something wrong with me. Like I had experienced so many of these things. They weren't like hallucinations. They weren't like things that weren't there. And so, like, I couldn't just, like, discount those things and just accept that, like, oh, well, there's just something wrong with you. So I held on to that even in my lowest moments. And I think people who put themselves, and ultimately I think that's what it is, like, we put ourselves through these situations, whatever happens in our lives, that's why we do it. Because when you hold on to that, it actually shows you, like, how powerful your consciousness is, and that if you can just maintain that belief and faith in that, you can pretty much get through anything. And it was a harrowing experience. It was fucking crazy. Like, it was truthfully, like... it was a lot, but I mean, yeah, I came out much better off for it. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, it seems like a critical part of your growth and your journey into who you are today. I'm curious if you could describe maybe what your life and worldview was like before and after this experience, like your perspective on reality.
Yeah. I mean, I would definitely say like I had a pretty loose conception of self and reality even before this experience. I think a lot of the things I had gone through with psychedelics and just in my regular consciousness from like when I was a young kid primed me to stay in that state for so long, because I think at any point it could have collapsed. Like if I was like, this is crazy, like this, and I thought that, but like if I really believed like this isn't happening, I think it would have stopped. But afterwards, I mean, during and afterwards, it's what people now, I think a lot of people go through this, they probably call like an acute state of getting downloads, of being like a really elevated state of consciousness. So feeling like just magic is literally everywhere all the time, not in a conceptual state, like not like everything's magic, but like literally watching miracles happen constantly, which I think, like I said, more people are familiar, but like 20 years ago, going through this and trying to communicate it to my peers who are like college kids and like even like older people, like I just sounded like a lunatic. I'm talking about like unconditional love and higher dimensions, and like the internet wasn't even fleshed out where you could actually like find out about this stuff. So it was just coming to me. And I think I maintained that state for those 3 months. Then afterwards, what I really believe happened is I didn't stabilize like the internal conviction and knowingness of what was happening. So of course it got reflected back to me through other people. And they're like, I think there's something wrong with you. And I couldn't like hold on that this was actually the way things worked. And it took me a solid, I mean, legitimately like 11 years to like really rebuild what I describe as like, I got blasted to the top of the mountain on like a rocket ship with that trip in those 3 months. Then I had to come crashing down because I didn't know how I got up there. I'm like, oh, I got to come crashing down. The second time around, which I would say is like last year, is like I actually went around the mountain, like scaled it really like meticulously. So like I knew how I had gotten there. I knew what challenges were there. I knew what other people could expect. And then I got to it's the same view, but I'm much more confident in how I got there, what helps, what doesn't, what may freak you out. And that way you can go up and down without like really just like coming to a crash. So I think that's how I describe my consciousness really changed in the years after the experience.
Right.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's like you got some reality to grip onto and your identity back in order, and then so you could integrate all those experiences. But it is really cool, like to experience what it's like to not feel like you have an identity, because you feel so limitless. But we can't function in the world like that. So it's like there's there's like a great aspect to it, and then there's like the part where it's like, well, I still have to like have a career and pay the bills and go visit people. So that's an amazing experience that you had, and it's great that you're able to share that with so many people.
Yeah, and I will say, like, the magic where I think both sides of that, when they come together and that you're not really you're not really Cosmo, you're not really Summer, you're not really Noah, but you are this like identity, this something deeper than that, but it's taken on this identity. So you don't discount that, but you keep it in your mind that you're more malleable than what you actually perceive yourself to be through your five senses. That's where like things get fun and interesting, because then you can function as like an individuated self, but you also remember like, oh, I'm limitless. Like, I'm actually like God. I'm a source of everything. And again, a lot of these things sound really good, feel really good conceptually, but until you actually like go through and maintain it over time and like understand, pressure test your reality is what I call it, it's hard to like fully grasp what the implications of that mean. But yeah, I mean, it's totally like, that's where the magic really is, like that crossroads of recognizing you're not who you think you are, but you also kind of are still a person. So like, don't discount that, because there's magic there too.
Yeah, balancing both sides of that. It's funny, I was just thinking about something similar yesterday about this concept of how we are souls playing or acting as humans, that we take on this human form, and we can look out and observe ourselves as we can latch on to this body, but ultimately when we transcend this body and we move on to whatever other dimensions exist, or wherever we go, we start to, or we recall that we are so much more than simply humans. Even though we identify so strongly with that while we're here, while we are playing this game of life.
Yeah. I mean, my conception of how we get here as human beings is you're this limitless, infinite being up before you take on form. And then you actually fall in love so much. You fall in love so much with this version of you now that you're like, oh, I got to be that. Like, I actually have to go into time, go into physicality to be that. And I think when people find themselves in like their darkest hours, or like things are just really not going their way, they forget that. Like, it's the most severe form of amnesia, and they forget they came here for a reason it's because they loved it. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's what we're doing. And when you maintain that perspective, it's like you really like you start to unleash like quite a bit of power, which I think has gotten like people react weird to that word, power, control. But I do think we have those things over our lives and our reality. And, my general axiom, if you just use that power lovingly, like you pretty much are good. You don't have to worry about like abusing it or falling down or like getting fucked up. So yeah, I think that's what we're doing here.
Yeah, and power over ourselves and our reality is good. Power over or under others is not what we're trying to do. And I don't think, I think that it would be great for our society to really grasp the difference in between those things.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's the famous quote. It's like, if you're Jesus and so is everyone else, that's good. If you're Jesus and no one else is, that's not so good. You're gonna have a problem there.
I am God and so are you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I resonate a lot with everything you just said. This idea of our true identity being this limitless, powerful, infinite, eternal being. And part of what makes this life and this reality on Earth so attractive actually is in fact the limitation, meaning that the norm, the sort of, I guess, the regular reality is us as infinite creator beings able to manufacture entire universes and planets and realities at will, at the speed of thought or faster than thought. and then Earth is like this sort of this bubble, this like experimentation or like zone where there are these very specific rules or limitations that we agree to step into as part of a learning experience, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot to that. And I think when we buck against that and kind of think that like these limitations are here to like mess us up or like they're unfortunate circumstances, then you're just reinforcing that as a belief. And as I understand it, the only thing that shapes our world, like our individual, like I think we're constantly creating our version of reality. We think we're talking about the same thing, but we're actually not. We can objectively observe similar things, same things, but we're constantly creating it. If you look at like that is like a concrete reality out there, you can draw some pretty crazy conclusions about what this place is, and ones that maybe aren't very comfortable. But when you flip it around and recognize that you really summon forth external reality from within, you loosen the shackles of what may have been your perception of what this world is. And I think like acutely, this is not a stretch to say these days, but like a lot of people are waking up to this fact. Like they're recognizing like how they feel, things start to happen. They start to feel like they're abundant, they're compassionate, they're loving, they're in bliss. Like those things start to funnel in. And like, that's not how most of us grew up thinking the world was, right? It's just like we were pitched a different story. The world's chaotic out there, like react to circumstances. There's some objective facts. But these constraints we theoretically place on ourselves is just that. Like we are agreeing to put them on ourselves. And it does feel like to me that these higher dimensions of consciousness, however people want to conceive of them, are now starting to like overlap this reality. Not that they haven't in the past, but we're becoming more aware of them. So like 3D, 4D, 5D, 6D, these things are always omnipresent. They're all around us, but now more people are waking up to this like consciousness dictating reality principle. So like a lot of those boundaries that we thought were like so real and so limiting are beginning to kind of like break apart. And I think depending on, your experience and your reaction to that, it's either incredibly liberating or incredibly terrifying. And it can be both. But that seems to be what's going on right now. And I'm just grateful that I had enough experiences prior to this point in time where like I'm like, oh, okay, I've been waiting for this. Like I understand what this is. I got it.
Yeah, I feel the same way too. It's crazy how fast everything is happening too. Like the consciousness is evolving. It seems like every couple of months there's a new issue of like equality or how we're treating each other, and it just comes in with like this wave of really intense emotion and everybody's experiencing it at once. And it's just like, wow, we went from like people not even being aware of it publicly to like it is in the forefront of the public eye. It's could be overwhelming, but I feel good too. I'm like, I'm ready for this. This is great.
Yeah, I think the next major step that we're seeing here, or what it feels like to me, is that people are recognizing that whenever they're like triggered by anything out there, that the only reason that is able to happen is because there's something in them that is reflecting back something they see out there. Like I saw this a lot with Trump and other things. Like it's not that we can agree like he does some stupid things and he says some shitty things, maybe not the nicest guy, but like the people who literally cannot detach from his energy, they're reacting to something in them. And like it doesn't mean they're the same person, it doesn't mean they do the same things, it just means there's some unresolved knot that they haven't explored. And that is where this like your God thing gets kind of inconvenient for a lot of people, because you lose the ability to blame anything on the outside. Anything, like the worst of the worst things that you would never do, you can't even judge that. And that's where like settling into that mentality, I think, gives people a lot of pushback, because it's all great when you're like spiritual, having fun, miracles, abundance and all that, but as soon as you see some external suffering or some real shitty stuff going down, you want to say, oh wow, that's something else that needs to be dealt with, rather than going inside and be like, what am I reacting to? Like, what's in me? And then when you do that, it's not that it like turns around necessarily an external reality immediately, but you at least have the correct platform and approach with how to deal with that stuff. And I think that's what a lot of people are encountering now. And plenty of us continue to make the misapprehension that there is something external that we need to like rail against, or we need to fight against, or we need to condemn. And I think it feels like we'll probably be in that energy for at least a couple more years. I mean, it's not a bad thing. It's just something I think more people need to like really understand, because if you don't, you're always going to be like judging some part of the world out there, which is you. And if you keep missing that, it's like, you got to keep doing it over and over again. It's like Groundhog's Day. So
Yeah, it's like the collective shadow, and then we all have our individual shadow. I'm wondering, like, have you done any shadow work? Because I'm curious about that. You seem like you're really in tune with like the balance of good and evil, and you're not afraid to talk about it.
Yeah, I think I've learned through helping people like professionally who have built up large followings in the spiritual community that I think one of the worst things you can do is disregard shadow stuff, or act like pay it lip service. Be like, yeah, there's a shadow, do shadow work, and then not do anything. And I've seen that happen too many times with people who are really preaching a message. And the thing about shadow work is it's really important, but like it's not fun when you actually are like going through it. I mean, you can enjoy the process of like growing and expanding, but like, there's some intense stuff there. So I really, this past year, it coincided really, with me kind of just understanding how to like whip reality into shape. I had to do like really intense shadow work. And when you do it, it's liberating, but like this is confronting your fears. This is confronting the aspects of yourself that are like, you know what? Yeah, I'm not just love and light all the time. I may be at my root unconditional love, and that may be my primary intention, but I'm going to do some things that carry destruction with them. I'm going to carry, some chaos with them. And if you just own that and accept it, it doesn't run you, right? Like if you don't accept those things and you just think you're this benevolent, beautiful angel who's only going to do good things, chances that you'll do something really fucked up that cuts against your, conscious moral code, those things go up. Like the chances of that happening go up and up. So I'm particularly wary of people who, like I said, don't acknowledge the destructive, shadowy kind of things we haven't cast light on yet, aspects of ourselves, or kind of more importantly, the people who are like, just gloss over it. They're like, yeah, do shadow work. It's important to confront your demons. And like, well, that's not, did you do that? Like, because I was fortunate. Yeah. I was fortunate enough to see like behind the scenes of like the new age spiritual Buddhist Vedic world, and where I kind of had like a dark night of the soul back in 2015 is seeing people who had been immersed in a lot of these teachings for 40-50 years, meditating, like really putting in the work, so to speak, just like be easily as fucked up as someone who had never heard about that stuff, but maybe even more, like just like because they were consciously aware. And like that freaked me out because, and I think everyone realizes you can't follow someone else. You have to like always follow like your path. But though a lot of those people shared the common trait where it's not like they didn't know about shadow work. Like they had been through some shit, they had lived some life experience, but like they weren't doing it. They were just talking about it. And I try not to get judgmental about it because that's my own cross to bear, but it really is important that people like focus in on the stuff that like they know maybe is like a weird aspect of themselves, because then it's liberating, and then you don't feel like obligated to act from that place. So yeah, it's important stuff.
It's counterintuitive. It's like touching a hot stove. It's like dealing with someone. It's dealing with someone out. Like when you meet someone and they rub you the wrong way, you avoid them, even though it's like subconscious. So it's really a challenge to like make yourself go into the things that you feel icky about yourself. What does that look like when you do it? Because everybody talks about it, like you said, and then I'm never hearing like, well, how do you do it? Is that just like sitting with those awful feelings about yourself, or is it journaling, or is it like, what does it look like for you or for?
I mean, for me, it's I always worked from this premise that your imagination precedes anything you're externally going to do. So I set the real intention of like having transcended certain aspects of my personality that I may not even be aware of. So what tends to happen for me is I get in like situations in the world that brings out my shadow stuff. So whether that's jealousy, whether it's anger, whether it's like hurting someone, whether it's like abandoning someone, like I literally have to play these things out. I mean, a few examples are one, you know, I left my marriage like a year ago, a year ago, right after my wife had our second kid, was like a month and a half old. And this was like a very objectively, I'm a piece of shit. Like, this is like one of the worst things you can do to someone, just or to your kids or anything. So I had to like go through this entire experience and really like confront what I was doing, why I was doing it. Was it an okay thing to do? Am I a bad person? Am I hurting people? And come to terms with all of those things, but still maintain the perspective that this was actually the right thing to do. And that gripped me. And it didn't feel like, you know, I'm a bad person before that. I have to confront this thing. I don't want to. It just was clearly there. It was something that was designed to show me something. And like, ultimately, I mean, I'm sure my wife has, soon to be ex-wife, has different perspective on it at this point, but I know she'll come around and see it. Like, this was meant to be the outcome for everyone. This actually will lead to far more harmony and happiness for everyone's lives than doing the opposite, which was just staying in a relationship that I knew wasn't right, that she probably knew wasn't right on a deep level, that wasn't going to be right for our kids. So that's shadow work. I mean, it's really putting yourself through stuff, but also taking accountability for it. Like, I could have left like a chump. I could have cheated. I could have just dipped out and like not taken care of my responsibility. So it's like confronting the stuff, then figuring out a way to actually like deal with it honorably, ethically, but not disregard that like you did some shit that actually has real world ramifications. And then other shadow stuff, for me, jealousy, like in a relationship, like my partner, she's incredibly beautiful, she's attractive, she's cool, she's like very like affable and like, you know, flirty sometimes. And that hit all of my triggers, like all of them. I had people like, you know, confessing their love for her, she's been like in on and off again relationships as soon as we got together. So all of this stuff came to the surface. For me, that looks like a lot of crying at times, being vulnerable, like really getting in touch for where these feelings are come from, a lot of ego stuff. But I mean, it looks like real life work. It's not for me just sitting down and being like, yeah, I'm going to deal with like me being a shitty person. It's like, I actually have to I'm the type of person who at least has to put myself through these scenarios and situations in order to transcend them. And I think for people who are like, well, I don't know if I'm doing it. It's like, find the patterns or relationships or cycles or themes in your life that keep coming up that aren't comfortable. That's your shadow work. Like, start dealing with that internally, and then you're actually doing shadow work.
Thank you. Oh my God. A real explanation. Finally. So it sounds like it's like when these things happen, instead of, you know, I feel like our society really gives us full like freedom to make up all these excuses and like say, well, you know, yeah, distractions, and then like, oh, it's because of this, it's because of that. But instead you hold it and you go, yeah, I fucked up. This is really shitty.
Yeah.
And you just be with it and you accept it about yourself. And then it can't just come blindside you again in the future if you keep doing that.
And yeah,
I see it. That's cool.
There's always a resonant energy to this stuff that we perceive as negative. We perceive as, you know, dark to the light. But what it really is like shadow work is just exposing light on places that don't have light on them. You haven't gone there yet. So it's not this process of like necessarily even accepting that you're a bad person. It's just that you have both polarities of energy there. Like I was saying to Denise today, we did some like cool constellation therapy stuff like with each other today. And you know, I was saying like I am really glad and happy that like I can't act out of resonance with how I feel, because if I could, I think I would be in a lot more challenging situations that would be a lot more work to do. But like I left a relationship, you know, I didn't leave 2 kids, but like I exited a house. I moved out before I met Denise. And like that to this day, like I feel sadness and like, I wish there was some reality where we could have been together, but I also feel like that was the perfect decision. I don't judge myself for that. And I think the shadow stuff is often like these made up narratives about who we are because we haven't dealt with the shit, rather than actually being like shitty people. Like, because it's really never that. Like, no one ever acts or hurts other people because they're just inherently a bad person. It's usually coming from trauma or shame or some difficult thing they haven't dealt with. So, I think like we're both good and bad, but I really don't know that how much I believe that like the bad and good part of it. It's just like we're a lot of different energy.
Yeah.
If we can get a good handle on it, we can probably express it in a more elegant way, which, you know, I think is cool.
Yeah, every like great evil dictator comes to mind because I'm sure they always had a plan, and from their perspective they really felt like they were doing the right thing. And I think it's like
Yeah.
a perfect example of the shadow. That's so freaking cool. I love that.
Yeah, part of our spiritual growth is about accepting, owning, and taking responsibility for all of our light and all of the shadow as well. And to recognize
Yeah.
that the shadow, I think, yeah, to echo what you were just saying is not necessarily a thing in and of itself, but it's the absence of light, right? So ultimately, at our core, like we are pure light. It just
Yeah.
we neglect parts of ourselves because they're uncomfortable when they don't feel good. And it reminds me of like Marge. There's an episode of The Simpsons where like Marge is encouraging Lisa to like push your feelings down, like, to
Yeah.
ignore those negative emotions. But the irony is that when we do that, as we've been encouraged by maybe family members or just friends or, you know, maybe movies or The Simpsons, is you know, it's creating resistance that actually makes those feelings, or it makes them, it empowers them, it makes them stronger. And we don't it makes it challenging to really overcome and transcend those negative aspects of ourselves if we try to ignore that or pretend like they don't even exist.
Yeah, and then like I use the analogy of like if you're sweeping a bunch of dirt under a carpet for decades, eventually there's going to be this huge lump in the carpet and you're going to trip over it. Like it's just like that's how it works. Like these shadow aspects of ourselves, difficult challenges, anxieties, doubts, fears, resistance, like they're not, we think they're there to like fuck our shit up because that's what it feels like, but they're actually there to show us that we can transcend them. And when you start accepting that, like you really have a different approach and relationship to when those things tend to pop up in your life. You know, you don't go, oh no, here I go again. You go, oh, this is an opportunity to like actually move past this. Great. And then the better you get at it, the faster you get to move through things. And then you actually get to for the most part, sit in a life of like pretty great harmony and bliss. I mean, like, I know a lot of people would look at the objective circumstances of my life over the last year and be like, wow, you must have like really been going through it. And like a little bit, but for the most part, it's been I hate to say it, but like 2020 has been a great year for me. I know it's like a rough year out there for most people, but it's been fucking fantastic for me. So
Same, yeah.
you know, you do get the sweetness. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about that specifically because one of my favorite aspects of your show and your perspective is how you maintain your optimism through all the chaos of your personal life, as well as, you know, of course, just what's going on in the world with COVID and all the riots and the seeming disparate mess of the White House. And, you know, you can name any number of crises, but what I hear from you is like, hey, like everything's good. We're still... We're creating amazing reality. So I would love to hear some of what's behind that energy that you're bringing
every time
forth.
we listen to your show, like I swear to God, I'll be in the shittiest mood, and I'm like all cynical, and then I see your Synchronicity logo and it's bright red, and I think that attracts me to it because I'm like feeling like I need a boost, and I'm like, I'm gonna listen to this. It's probably gonna be something I've already heard, or and then I listen to it and it's like, you just blow my mind, and you remind me about synchronicity, and you remind me about what a fucking miracle every day is, and I'm like, oh God, wow, humbled.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason that it's so effective, and I've fully accepted that now, just seeing like the messages I get from people and just knowing like people in my life who appreciate it, is like I know what it's like to be on the other side of that. I know what it's like to be in a shitty mood. I mean, I still go through shitty moods from time to time in life. When I'm going through the shadow work, I'm not like, oh, everything's great all the time. But I know what it feels like to be on the other side, and I know what it felt like when I didn't believe in this stuff and I didn't experience it on a regular basis, and it wasn't a world that felt that great. It didn't really like make sense to me. It didn't feel accurate. So that gives me like the confidence and faith to do it. And then like really early on when I came in contact with a lot of this Goddard stuff and it related to the experience that I had, it's just like I can't not believe it at this point. Like there's too much over. It's like if I told you like, water doesn't exist. Like you're just gonna be like, all right, you can say whatever you want, but I know water exists. So like it's almost like this unshakable conviction and faith that I have, even when like I forget it for a little bit or for like 8 hours or like something happens, shadow material I'm working through. So that like gives me like a base platform to like operate from. And then I've also found that just by being vulnerable and honest and authentic. So even in times in the podcast in the past where like I wasn't maintaining this, like if you go back to the beginning, there's a lot of episodes there. There's a dip in a few of like, few 20 episodes where like I was going through a big professional divorce, like a big dark night of the soul. And like, I'm still relatively optimistic, but you can hear some pessimism sneaking in. So I just, at this point, I've seen too much magic. I've seen too much, like, I know how this stuff works. Not in like I know everything type of way that like it's kind of just unshakable. And like I just don't even question it. And I do think it's important that like when people think about the imaginal act stuff, if you just like pre-program in or meta-program in like a state of belief and faith, like you'll start to naturally, like, do you know how many times like even in the past like 3 episodes, I was going to record the day before, but I didn't feel quite right. I felt a little bit off, like was going through some shit. And then like, even like, I think it was a few episodes ago, like right before I was going to record, like I felt a little weird. Like I wasn't feeling super enthusiastic. But once I start just like talking about this, it's like it just starts flooding back. And I'm like, oh yeah, I feel great. And I tune myself up. So if I can trust that like I have that ability to tune myself up, I think that carries through in my voice and what I'm putting out there. And so like people latch onto that and they're like, oh yeah. And then the beauty of a lot of the stuff I talk about, it's all testable. Like it's not like some abstract thing that I'm asking people to believe in so they can pay me money and I can be the person who told them some shit. It's just like, try this stuff out, see if it works in your life. If you do that honestly and authentically, it will work. And then once it works, like how many times do you want to question it? Like how many times do you want to say it's not like that? If you're like me, a lot. Like I want to make sure this thing is rock solid. I don't want to like find out like it's only solid up to a certain point. And this is why, I mean, I was talking about with Ramin who did my logo, like he's like, how do you know like we're on the best timeline? I'm like, I just know it. Like I know if I did this for myself and I am God and I am consciousness and I actually have stabilized this, then everyone is going to do it because I'm not different than anyone else. And if that's true, it means we're inevitably on the best timeline. And that comes with also like sometimes just outright rejecting other narratives of what's going on. Like I could look out in the world and say there's any number of things that are objectively going super wrong, super bad. We're in bad systems, bad things are happening, things are getting worse, but it's just like, I'm pretty sure that's not what's happening. And until I get evidence that my consciousness isn't the thing creating reality and that's not what everyone is doing, I'm going to maintain that we're on the best timeline and, get to be in Turkey on yachts and beaches. So I mean, it's just the way it works.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. And
yeah, Noah's in Turkey, by the way.
Certainly one of the biggest turning points in my worldview and in my perspective on life and reality was, listening to Alan Watts and how he's, going on about the way in which the world as we perceive it outside is merely a reflection of our own internal state, how we're thinking, what our beliefs are, how we're feeling. And that's just like, whoa, once you start to truly, first of all, it starts off as a concept, but then you can really tangibly know it to be true. And there's, it comes to a point where I have to take complete responsibility for everything in my life and all the negative and positive circumstances that I find myself in, because ultimately I co-created them. And it's not like I'm the sole creator. It's like we're all co-creating this reality together and we have this shared reality.
Yeah. And I don't think I disagree with that, but what I do tend to do, and I think this frustrates plenty of my friends and spiritual friends, is I actually think that while we are co-creating, that can clearly be seen, we're actually just creating it for ourselves. We just happen to overlap in enough places where it seems like we're co-creating. But I really do believe fundamentally that everything I see, not in an egoic way, not in like I'm going to take personal responsibility like for creating the trees and the earth and the sun and the stars, but I really do think that's what's going on. Like we are individually summoning aspects of the divine in our reality. And you know, maybe this is the wrong approach. Maybe it's meant to be more collaborative and team-like, and I think that's certainly an aspect of being alive and being human. But I just like I'm comfortable with taking on that level of responsibility. So if I see some injustice in the world, I can take responsibility for it and be like, no, that's not what's going to happen. And if it's something I really care about and want to put my awareness and attention on, then I'm going to do that, and I'm going to work towards that in whatever way I can. That I just like this idea of like really having personal agency and power and control over your life, like individually, because then you just, it's so hard to like stay in a victim mentality. And this isn't denying the fact that people are in situations where they're actual victims. If you're a victim of a crime or, you know, some horrible thing, like I'm not saying that's not objectively true, but when you recognize that you may have energetically placed yourself in that situation, not consciously, but for a reason, you tend to get to the root of like what's actually going on. And then these negative experiences, even if they occur, you don't react to them in the same way. So I really just like, it's kind of like a very, I don't want to say rigid, but it's like a hard line approach to like what reality is. And it just like, to be clear, like logically, analytically, it makes no sense. Like it doesn't make sense that we individually are creating our own individual worlds. Like we can say, well, that tree fell over there. We all saw it. Who did it? It's not like that. But the more I get in contact with kind of using my consciousness, awareness, and imagination for like pretty miraculous, insane things, and they keep happening, it's hard for me to say that's not true. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I'm curious, could you maybe give some specific examples of some of maybe like the most bizarre or crazy synchronicities that you've experienced? And I mean, your podcast is all about synchronicity. It's kind of like the big theme here, right? I would love to hear some like impossible situations that
to me, the fact that I'm even here right now is like mind blowing. I mean, we all know we're in the middle of a pandemic. It's an international pandemic. We spoke about it a little bit, but like the United States, there are literally 4 countries that Americans are allowed to travel to: Mexico, Tanzania, some weird like middle Eurasian European country, I forget what it is, and Turkey. And every flight was getting canceled that we had booked to Turkey, like every single one. Like it was just looking like there was no way we're actually going to get there, no way we were going to even get back, all of these things. And then somehow magically, I just kept imagining getting off the plane, being in Turkey. And now I've been here for 37 days. I come back in a few days. Like that to me, like in terms of like reality bending, like that was a really big one. Cause it's just like objectively, there's no way I'm supposed to be here. If there's a map, there was a literal map. I put it on Instagram of just the countries in green where America is. The title was a Vice article. It was US passports are worthless now. And there was one, and I'm like, oh my God, like that. What are the chances, you know, in the relationship that I'm in now, also like the most magical, transcendent, beautiful relationship I could ever imagine for anyone in life. And not only has it been like about 9 or 10 months at this point, but I mean, it just keeps getting better. And to the point where like we're both objectively aware of what's going on. And like those two are big enough for me. Like I tell Denise all the time, like this is better than like if I won the lottery, but I mean, there's been countless examples of like, you know, me imagining certain amounts of money in my bank account and like more than I've ever seen in there. And then within a few days or within a week or so, like there's the money. And one of the things that I'm really like insistent on with like manifestation, or if you want to call it that, or just like using your imagination, is you don't get attached to the ways and means and the specific outcomes, but you get the feeling of what it feels like to have money or be in the perfect relationship or be in a certain location. And if you accept that as real, then it inevitably has to happen, because everything that has like or will happen already happened. Like it's already there. We're just like uncovering it. So if you really lock into that feeling with your consciousness, it has no choice but to kind of obey you. Where people get tripped up is like there's shit in their life that like they don't like? And they're like, well, why would I do this? I don't want this. But it's like, you do. You feel like that's what your life is. You feel like that's what you're summoning forth. And, that's not comfortable. But when you recognize it, you at least have the power to insert yourself and change some aspect of it. So it's empowering. I mean, it can be freaky,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, like those are just a few amongst many. I mean, I picked those because relationships, travel, and money are pretty big themes for people in life. And like, those are the big ones for me. Also, like, imagining that me leaving a marriage with 2 small children wouldn't be a total catastrophe for me and everyone else. And it hasn't been. Like, it's actually been a pretty surprising and amazing experience for everyone involved, including my soon to be ex-wife, who's like, she's not thrilled about this. She's not happy about it. She's legitimately heartbroken in a lot of ways, but even I can see that she sees like why this is happening. And it wasn't just because I'm an asshole, but because like it served some higher function for everyone's life. And, those are the biggest ones to me. Those are like really important ones, but there's all the little stuff too that's fun and cool, but those are the big ones.
Sure. Thank you.
Your
Yeah.
children are beautiful, by the way. I see you're always posting photos of videos of them.
Yeah.
They're really adorable.
They're fucking cute. I know. It's really crazy.
Yeah, it's it makes me think about like what you're saying about it being an individual thing. I think where that idea of collective creation or versus individual creation, I think like what feels true to me is that it's really the same thing. It's just as humans with our biology in this realm in this dimension, we have this illusion of separation. And I think that is where we get the idea of that we're all co-creating. We've really got to get everybody on board with our narrative or it's never going to work. But I think that we're all connected. We're all part of this same collective soul or energy. And so we are doing it ourselves, but at the same time, we're doing it together because we're one. So that's kind of what resonates as true for me. And I think that it's better to choose. You can work with the individual side of it more because it eliminates some of the helplessness of like, dude, if I don't get everybody on board, we're screwed. We're going to go down. And if you're just focusing on your own life and what you can do, and it's a really great feeling of responsibility and security that it creates. So I kind of get where you're going with that individual narrative.
That's a really good point you're making too about how we're all one, and that's why it's valid in both ways. And I do think that the more you stabilize your individual or individuated state of consciousness, you'll just be in a better position to connect with other individuated consciousnesses. Like that's how it works. If we don't start with ourselves, the potential for like miscommunication or like distortions to come in when we start engaging with reflections of ourselves, aka other people, again, that likelihood goes up quite a bit. So I mean, that's a really smart thing you said there about why they're both valid. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I'm reminded of that Steve Buscemi meme where he's like, "Hello, fellow kids." It's like, "Hello, fellow reflection."
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah.
No, I want to zero in on something you said earlier, which was really important and powerful about the mechanics of manifestation, and something that I think people listening can really take away as something that will really help transform their lives into what they've always dreamed of. And it's about the importance of feeling the feelings of the desired state or outcome that you want, and not necessarily, again, getting attached to the specific circumstances or the details of how it's going to happen. But this is something that I've heard you talk about in several of your podcasts with this Neville Goddard concept of your imagination being God. And that's a really wild concept. I'd love to hear a little bit about your take on that. And if you could describe a little bit about who Neville Goddard is for people who've never heard of this guy.
Yeah. I mean, Neville Goddard was a 20th century mystic, primarily coming from a Christian mysticism and Kabbalistic perspective, used a lot of Bible stuff to teach. I grew up Reformed Jewish, so like I didn't hear almost any of this stuff growing up. I think that gave me a pathway to not like rejecting or like grasping for it. So that was kind of nice for me. Also, like that experience I had 20 years ago, like I thought I was like I didn't think it. I knew I was Jesus for like 2-3 weeks. Like I knew it, and that was weird to feel because I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know anything about it. So he started teaching a lot about that, and his primary tenet, he had a few of them, but that, yeah, you're God, your imagination, this sense of I am, that's God. There are no external gods. There are no external deities. All the characters in the Bible or any other scripture or any other narrative for that point are just psychological archetypes of who you are. They're characters that we move through in various states. And when you can kind of decode them and look through the kind of objective meaning, then you can get to the symbolic meaning of these things, and it becomes a very effective tool for kind of uncovering aspects of your consciousness. So he like I said, he had that imagination is God thing, but he had this imagination technique, right? Various techniques that he would talk about. And the main one of his books is actually called this is Feeling is the Secret. And this, like I'm a water sign, I'm a Cancer, I got a Scorpio, I got a lot of like water and fire energy. So a lot of this stuff like mystically just resonated with me and made sense. I don't have a problem feeling things at all. I'm still intellectual. I like to like analyze things, but I'm really like, I feel with my heart and my intuition more than anything else. So the whole trick of it is like, you just have to feel and live from the end. So you don't imagine or think about doing the thing that you want to do. You go a step past it and you feel like what it would feel like to be the person you assume yourself to be. And you can start with like outcomes related to material things or relationships. But what really gets powerful is when you feel yourself to be like a very powerful state of consciousness. He refers to them as states, but states of consciousness is what he's talking about. And so like if you really start like getting up there and using ecstasy, bliss, contentment, abundance, like really powerful states and feel them, he recommends, doing this thing where you put yourself in a drowsy like state before you go to sleep, and you kind of just drift off with that conviction. And eventually like you just kind of subconsciously accept it, and then things start to happen. But it doesn't even have to be in that state akin to sleep, as he talks about. It can just be like a whimsical thought that comes up in your head and you accept. And when you do that, you start to realize like it's always that simple. And you also recognize when things start to go haywire in your life and things start to kind of blow up, it doesn't necessarily mean anything is wrong. It's just you can't embody the same world that you lived in before. Like I can't be still married and be in Turkey. It's like that. I mean, I'm sure there's a reality where that can happen, but I probably wouldn't be talking to you guys about how things are working out. So basically, if you get to the point where you feel what it feels like to either have something or be something or be having done something, more importantly, like that is the main trigger. It's the operative mechanism that gets you from where you are now to where you can be or where you want to be, which is your desires. And like that's another thing he talked about. A lot of us have like a very weird relationship with our desires. Like we judge them. We go like, I don't know if that's okay to have. I don't know if that's a good thing. Yeah, and so like when you start to look at your desires as like heaven sent messages from you for you, you start to be able to trust yourself to like actually go after them and like not feel weird. And like there's a lot of reasons why people can feel weird about like desires they have. But when you recognize they're like stepping stones to show you who you are, like then it becomes fun. Then you're like, oh, I want this thing because I'm supposed to have it, or I'm supposed to go through the experience of desiring it. And then I'm not like powerless to achieve it, but I actually can get whatever I want. Then you get to like move through this like evolutionary ladder like much more quickly, metaphysically speaking. And that, I think that's what most people who are incarnating at this point in time are here to do, right? And it's like, this is a good time to do it. So that's what I think we're doing.
So cool that you brought up the part about religion and Neville Goddard's piece using the Bible or the example of Christ. And it's something that like I think about a lot that's really beautiful. And it's sad that there's a lot of argument about different religions because it is just a state of consciousness. Like you can be Jewish and love your Jewish heritage, but you can also have a Christ consciousness. And I think that was Christ's message, was to have his consciousness of unconditional love. It's not about like, I'm going to abandon Judaism and become a Christian and totally close the door on my old life and have a new religion. It's not about that. It's about having Christ consciousness. And we can all do that. Anyone can do that.
Yeah, and this is another thing that this is what really clicked me into Neville Goddard more than all the manifestation stuff is like he was like, you are Jesus. Like what Jesus is, what Jesus Christ is pinning down this eternal divine consciousness, crucifying it to this world that we experience here. And when you wake up to that fact, when you really remember it, that's called Jesus Christ. It's not a person. It's not a guy. He may have
Yes,
also been a guy,
exactly.
but it's literally the resurrection of your divinity.
Yeah.
And you're like, ah.
Wow.
And that's why, like, back then, yeah,
That's
when I was
killer.
back then, I was having all of these thoughts and I felt like this, but I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, this is totally bonkers. I've actually gone insane now. Like, what is going on? But, like, when I heard him lucidly explain that, I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
I get it.
he's
now.
an
This
example
actually,
of
this
what can
puts
happen
things
to
together.
anybody.
Yeah. It's funny.
Exactly.
I'm
Exactly.
reminded of, I don't know, that part in like Spider-Man 3 that's ridiculed where he's like walking down the street, like all happy, like, and there's that music playing and I don't know, he's like embodying this energy of like this really like kind of powerful being. And I think that is something that's a state of consciousness that is actually our natural state of being in joy and bliss and connection and love with everyone and everything around us, and recognizing the amazing miracle of life and the synchronicity and the flow of energy of the way that everything is connected. That is ultimately the truth. But there's, sometimes for some of us that we allow these negative emotions or distracting thoughts to take us away, to distract us from that amazing bliss and miracle of reality.
And that feeling of
I mean,
like how you're saying it's about the feeling, creating the feeling inside of yourself. I think that's where the secrets went wrong because they were too focused on thought and talking about telling people to think things. And that's why people got so insulted by it because they're like, you can't think yourself out of cancer, because they forgot that it's about the feeling and creating that resonant frequency that then your external state matches with, like the Christ consciousness. I have a question for you.
And I think
I'm wondering.
yeah.
Oh yeah, or if you want to say something about that, go for it. But it's
No.
about Neville
Go
Goddard.
ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering, has anyone ever brought this up to you? Is there a Mandela effect around Neville Goddard? Because I had a weird Mandela effect experience with him.
Yeah, I mean, all I can say is that there's some aspect of reality that we internally unlock when we get in that state of consciousness where like we actually open up to this is how things work. So from what I understand about revision techniques and just how our consciousness works is like what we perceive as time isn't really what's going on. So when we really like embody this timeless states, reality can restructure itself to like feed our beliefs and our principles. So like I think the Mandela effect is essentially that. And when we have these shared ones, they feel a lot more powerful. But like I know just from using the revision technique for anything from the minor incident to a day that didn't go well to like some deep-seated trauma that like it really does change a lot of stuff. Even people who like maybe you had like falling out with, like, it's not that the event didn't happen, but their reactions in your world will change completely. So I think like when we kind of get into that, I mean, I know for like the other that really not really clicked in, and I was already sold, but like he talks about these 3 visions he had, and the last and most powerful one where he was like totally changed his mind about like how everything worked and was all about this Jesus Christ state and all these things was on July 20th, which is my birthday. And I'm like, all right, this is too weird. Like, I'm like, I can't process this right now. And so like, I think a lot of people get those experiences because like, it's a frequency. It's like a resonant frequency that when you start and you hear it, like it shapes the wave, the sound around you and the world around you. So I do think there's a lot of Mandela effects going on there. And I know that like even since when I found him a year ago, he's grown so much. I'd never heard of him. I had heard of like every spiritual, I don't say every, but like
Yes,
I was
that's
really
exactly
reading
what
a
happened
lot.
to
I was
me.
doing a lot. Yeah. And then all of a sudden he's everywhere and you find him just like in random places and from people you didn't know. So yeah, it's one of those things. Yeah.
Yeah, this aspect of time is really fascinating to me, and something that I'm really looking to get your perspective on, specifically with this concept of precognitive dreams, and what it shows us about the nature of time and the nature of free will. I recently had just like a crystal clear example of this that was just like so mind blowing a few weeks ago, where I had this dream that I was attempting to escape from a large cruise ship, and at the end, I got into this little sort of like personal yellow submarine, and then I didn't manage to fully escape, and I was like, wow, it was like kind of an odd dream. I've never had something like that before. And then that night we watched this movie on Netflix, Project Power, and part of the ending of that movie, there are characters escaping a cruise ship, and they get into a yellow submarine. And I'm like,
we were like this. We were like,
I dreamed of that. I in my mind the night before, I created a virtual reality simulation where I was in that movie, in the world of that movie as those characters. I didn't know I was going to watch that movie. I didn't know that scene was in the movie. There's no other way. There's no explanation for it. It's inexplicable. And and it's not even something that I want to attempt to try and explain, because it kind of takes away from the magic of it, right? Because it's just like, whoa, that's amazing. So have you ever had precognitive dreams, and what's your take on this? What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I get them quite a bit. I had one very recently. Denise gets them like all the time, like eerily so. But I had one recently where I was parachuting down around a stadium, and I had never parachuted before. I had never really even seen that it was something that people did. I knew about hang gliding and like jumping out of an airplane, but like not like the way I had seen it. And I felt it, and I did it the whole way down, and it was incredibly vivid. Didn't think anything of it. I woke up the next morning, told Denise. It's like, that was weird. 2 days later, we were at this place in Turkey where literally it's like one of the most famous places in the world where people are parachuting down, and she did it. Like, she had always wanted to do this. I had no idea. And she parachuted down. She has pictures. It's the most incredible thing I've ever seen. And I was like, that's fucking weird. Because like I was like, I don't need to do it. I'm not going to do it. I already did it in my dream.
you already did it.
But that stuff happens all the time. I was like, I already did it. I don't need to do it here. I'll do it. I also think, yeah, I'm good on that. But I do think we work through a lot. Like, the dream world is a different realm of consciousness where we have the same ability to work through themes and energies and shadow work. So I've really been subscribing to this theory that we can do shadow work, we can do deeply transcendent, like personal, spiritual, evolutionary work in our dreams. And if we accept them as equally as valid as this world, even though they don't feel as real and tangible as this world, they serve an important function. And I think your movie dream, just from like an allegory standpoint, like gives a pretty clear indication of what this world is. This world is a movie, right? You're the writer, the producer, the director, and the actor. So like you embodying these roles before you actually saw the movie is like clearly outlining an aspect of how this reality works. Like, this is what we're doing. Like, that's why, like, I've seen a lot of people. I saw on TikTok this dude who like had like a 15-second long deja vu, and you can see him like really freaking out the whole time. He's like, they usually don't last that long. And it's like, what that is it's deja vu is really just an example of you remembering something that you consciously created, and then you're remembering it in the moment. That would freak us out if we were just in that state constantly, but that's really what's going on. So, you know, when we get these precognitive dreams and things like that, or do you experience something before we do it, or we see something that's related to it, I think we're just seeing like a more accurate depiction of what reality actually is. And that's cool to me, because that's like, that shows us that we actually have even power and control when we're not conscious in the waking world, which is like a very liberating, again, you know, I tell people to take naps. Like, that's my solution to a lot of things. Like, set your intention and take a nap. Like, that's it. Don't have to do anything else. And it works because, like, that's where we do a lot of heavy lifting before we experience it in this world. So, yeah.
What's so amazing and meta about this reality, what you were describing about how we are the writer, director, producer, editor of the movie of our own lives. It's actually very similar to a virtual reality company that I started called Mindshow, where you get to actually do that, where you can create your own 3D animation by embodying a virtual cartoon character. And essentially we created this whole platform for people to become the writer, the producer, the director, the editor, the filmmaker, the cinematographer of their own movie inside of virtual reality. So we're reflecting a fundamental aspect of what we are doing here as souls having a human experience, but it's like this other layer, this other level where it's like even more meta, where we're putting that in a VR experience that other people can embody.
Yeah, I mean, it's usually we find ourselves doing the things that like mean the most to us, and I think for a lot of us, like actually reflecting back what is empowering and what's actually going on here is like why a lot of us are here at this point in time. And we could have incarnated, you know, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, where like talking about these things could have gotten you killed. So like we're kind of like lining up. I think a lot of people here have very good timing in terms of what we're supposed to be doing. So that makes sense to me that you did that. That's pretty cool, man.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll share a link with you after the show just to give you a little bit more context. But yeah, about the timing of things, that's something that's also on my mind as well, right? Because, you know, it's what's so mind-blowing is once I had the conception of the infinite possibilities, right? The infinite realities, dimensions that we could be experiencing, and maybe I shouldn't say and we are experiencing this particular one right now, where we're having this conversation, and all the history and past of our lives and in the future moments to be had. What's the significance of that? You know, we're here on Earth as we with this body in this particular location, and we have these relationships, and we could be on some other planet in some other dimension, but we chose the one here in this particular moment where we seem to be on this precipice of this evolution of consciousness. I'm curious what your take is on, you know, I guess our role in this specific time, in this cultural moment of COVID and all these, you know, essentially this consciousness renaissance that I believe is happening right now, or we're in the middle of.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that this is what we're in the middle of. I think this is partially a Neville Goddard thing, partially kind of like a Vedic Buddhist thing, but I think for a lot of people, this is like the last go around. I don't think we're going to play our lives out over and over and over again, and I think this is probably one of the last bodies we have in this place. I think, you know, I do believe in past lives. You could have had different versions of you in different forms, but I think this one we will keep playing out until we fully understand what we're doing here. And I think we're in an auspicious moment in time where a lot of people have kind of constellated together to wake up together as like a true reflection of what's going on. So to me, that's like very exciting and really fun. You know, but for a lot of people, it's like, what the fuck? Like, I don't know if I'm ready for that. But it really does feel like that to me, just because, you know, I'll have these moments, you know, a lot where I'm just like, that's definitely what's going on here. Like, I see enough evidence that like this is actually what we've chosen to do. And I also think, like, if you think about all of the unlimited dimensions and possibilities and infinite timelines, like, you know, it takes like a fair amount of cojones to like come to a place where you're bound by these rules and restrictions and things seemingly to kind of bust out of them. So I think a lot of us have these spirits, these like pretty strong, like crystallized, like faith, like spirits to actually like do this and like go through all this kind of what seems like turmoil and chaos now, but come out on another side and either set strong foundational seeds for what is going to evolve in linear time, or actually just like be able to have the beauty of what both of these worlds were like before and after. And so I just think it's like a cool, badass thing to do. And I feel like that's most of the people I resonate with and like my closest friends, like that's their vibe too. Just like really cool, you know, like people willing to put in the real work for this stuff, no matter what it looks like. And that just seems like a lot of people signed up for that. And yeah, it's fun.
It
Yeah.
is. It really is.
It's almost like you got to have you got to be real tough if you want to come to earth, right? Knowing all the craziness
Yeah,
that's going on right now.
totally.
Yeah. Cool. So we should probably wrap up soon, but I want to ask you a few last questions.
Sure.
What have been the most powerful spiritual practices or tools for helping you live a healthier and happier life?
I mean, one of the biggest one is just being grateful. Like, just, I know it's like kind of hokey and kind of like silly,
Mm-hmm.
but like just really having genuine gratitude for where you are, what you're doing. And like when you get in touch with like your real self, your true power, your imagination being God, it's kind of hard not to be grateful. And this is like the biggest hack that I've seen, like for myself, is like when you really feel grateful for something that you haven't experienced yet, like in this reality, you're gonna get that thing like pretty fast. So like that's, I'm kind of like about these practical tools. I think another one that's been really helpful for me is, as someone who traditionally didn't find the type of value that is often spoke about with like sitting down vipassana meditation, just like sitting with your eyes closed or open and focusing on your breath, like I found the idea of recognizing that everything you're doing is meditation. Like the chances are you're probably some being in higher dimensional reality in a meditative posture doing something, and that this is an emanation of that.
Yeah.
It kind of
Yeah.
makes it easier to not get caught up that you have to do something as a spiritual practice. Like I have to sit down. Like there's value to it, and I don't want to negate that. But I know a lot of
Sure.
people bump up against this thing where if you ask a traditional meditation teacher, like, why when I sit down and meditate are my thoughts moving so fast? And they'll say, well, what's monkey mind? You need to quiet the mind, or you need to observe the mind. It's like, cool, got it. But like, I think there's something else going on here. I think like I'm supposed to focus on these things that are coming up. I think when you can pull away from that and zoom out and recognize that like you're always in a constant state of meditation, and these thoughts running through your head are always there to be observed and kind of worked with and controlled and directed, that's been liberating for me. And it doesn't mean you don't do traditional meditation. Like I'm not here to shit on that, but I think like it's important that you recognize you're always doing this, and it doesn't have to look a certain way. But gratitude and recognizing that, I think, have been pivotal in my life. And yeah, I highly recommend them.
Yeah. Love that. Gratitude is super powerful.
Yeah.
Instantly
Yeah.
puts you in a different state of consciousness.
We have
Yeah.
so many more questions, like a really long list for you. So we're gonna have to have you come back sometime or something if you're down, because
For sure.
it's just such a joy
Totally.
and so much fun talking to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Where can
Likewise.
people learn more about your podcast and your work?
Synchronicity is the podcast on all the places. Syncpodcast.com, SYNC. My Instagram, my Twitter. There's a Patreon where we're doing a lot of imaginal consciousness stuff, but also a lot of cryptocurrency stuff. Had that running for a few years, and that's been fun for a lot of people. And, just I'm available. I'm out there. I'm not hard to find.
And your music too. We didn't get to talk about that, but do you have your
Oh, yeah.
music published anywhere? You're like a Renaissance
Yeah, I
man. You do
have-
so many things.
I do have the music stuff. A lot of the music is on the Patreon that you hear on the podcast, and then I have a single, 2 tracks coming out when I get back to the States in a few weeks, and then I have like albums and other things slated for the next year or so. I think the timing will usually be right on those things, but yeah, there's a lot that will be publicly published within like a year.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah, and I'll just throw out, if you're enjoying a life economy, you're definitely going to love Synchronicity. Lots of similar topics around spirituality and consciousness, and many conversations similar to this one. So it's been a great pleasure to connect with you and to have you on the show, and we're super grateful. And yeah, this has been awesome.
Yeah, likewise, guys. This has been great.
Awesome. So for those listening, we'll be back in a few weeks on 9/11 with Hal Hefner, an artist who is creating some beautiful work. And if you are enjoying this podcast, please share it with a friend. Visit alifeeconomy.com or, tune in then. So thank you so much. Thank you, Noah. And it's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.